Ambassador?
Well, excuse me, that's the first I've heard that those are our objectives. Those objectives are quite narrowly stated, the Navy, and the short-range ballistic missiles. By the way, short-range ballistic missiles threaten our Gulf partners. That's, by the way, not the concern of the Israelis. The Israelis were the medium-range ballistic missiles. So he's introducing what is a very narrow set of objectives. By the way, if those are the objectives, what Barry was just saying, we'll achieve those objectives this week. So if that's all we're talking about, then you obviously are gonna be able to curtail this sooner rather than later. I would say, just as a general observation, I think the objectives of the administration are not regime change, they're regime weakening. And they are a combination of regime weakening on the one hand, and on the other, destroying to the extent we can the Iranian ability to threaten their neighbors, whether it's their immediate neighbors or it's Israel. That's the essence of what our objective seems to be. The idea of, we're creating a possibility for the Iranian public. Here's their chance. If they succeed, great. If they don't, well, that was their problem. The problem with such an approach is, and Barry was getting at this, there's 150,000 IRGC. There's 200,000 Basij. Now, it is true that we and the Israelis are hitting their headquarters, both central headquarters, regional headquarters, some of the provincial headquarters, and we're disrupting their command control. And maybe that is weakening them, but the most it might be doing is disrupting them to the point where maybe there could be some defections. Barry made a reference to the fact maybe the military, which is separate from the Basij and the IRGC, would see that ultimately their role is to protect the Iranian public. That would be desirable. We have no way of knowing if that's going to be the case. But regime weakening means maybe they're less a threat to their own population. That remains to be seen. But certainly they become much less of a threat within the region.
When you look at the diplomatic piece of this, which would involve some non-war long-term plan, how should we understand that in the history of U.S. dealings with Iran? There were periods where there was, of course, no talk. There was the Obama effort to have both diplomacy and it backed on the ground with inspection-type dealings. And there is what we were just discussing, but only briefly with you and the general about, well, yeah, if you use enough force in the right way to change reality, you might then get a weakened opponent that adheres to diplomacy they otherwise would not. That's the best hawkish case. Can you speak to us about that in plain English with regard to where we've been with Iran? Because folks remember President Obama saying, yeah, if we can get to X, then we'll call that a good enough holding pattern.
I think the way you just described it is actually quite good. What the JCPOA were not that it bought you 15 years. The problem I had is I didn't see a strategy to take advantage of those 15 years. The 15 years bought you time to do something much more fundamental. The Iranians were not giving up the right to enrich. On the contrary, they were going to be enriching. Even more, after 15 years, there were no limits whatsoever on the scale or size of their program. There were no limits as to how much they could enrich. So what you really had to do was work out a JCPOA 2 to build on that, to really shape differently their approach to the whole question of their nuclear enrichment, but also ensuring they couldn't have nuclear weapons. When President Trump says, I want them to say we won't have nuclear weapons, it's easy for them to say they won't have nuclear weapons. The question becomes, what kind of a nuclear infrastructure are they permitted to have? And they're right to say zero enrichment is the best way to ensure that if they're not able to create their own enrichment, and when you enrich, you do one of two things with it. You can turn it into a fuel to power a nuclear reactor to create electricity, or you can turn it into a core of a bomb. The problem with independent enrichment is unless you have complete controls over this, and unless you can ensure it's never enriched above a low level, anything above 20% is considered highly enriched uranium, then you run the risk that they can have a covert program, they could do something you wouldn't be aware of, and that's what you want to be able to rule out. Now, the question you're posing about where we are today, I don't know who we would negotiate with right now. I mean, is there someone in this regime who, A, can speak for the regime, which is unclear, but if there is someone in the regime who can speak for the regime, could they feel, okay, the consequences of this war, if it continues, will threaten the regime? It is true, we can weaken them to the point where they become so weak that they really can't withstand, because maybe you see all sorts of defections within the besieged and the Revolutionary Guard to save themselves, to save the regime. If there's that sense that they are getting to the point where they're weak enough, and you have someone who can speak for the regime, and they say, they pass a message, my view has been, I can see Putin coming in because they have a relationship with him. He would want to show his relevance, and he also wants to show Trump how he can give him a way out and then have Trump reward him with his posture on Ukraine. I could see him coming in and saying, look, there's no way I can go to Trump unless you agree that you'll have zero enrichment. I'm ready to go to him, but you got to give me that. You got to give me that in my pocket. Now, if that happens, then you have a basis on which to deal with the nuclear program in perpetuity.
And to distill, I'm only jumping in to distill it. Is it too much a simplification to say that this current Trump policy is risky to the point of reckless in the views of its critics, but there is a non-zero chance that it lands with something that the Obama administration would have cheered, that other Western allies welcome, that it could eventually land with they're weak and scared, and you've got more people in those layers of leadership in Iran worried about their own survival than what was the goal of the prior thinking, which was to continue to be bellicose, both because it was part of their theocracy, but also because they viewed it as a position of strength.
Absolutely. Plus, Supreme Leader's gone. And emotionally, ideologically, he couldn't handle this. This would be too much of a capitulation. It would be too much of a defeat of the ideology. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people in the regime who reflect that. There are. But there may now be others who say, you know what, the whole hassle is going to come collapsing on us. What's different today than when President Obama was negotiating was the Iranians had some signs of weakness, it's for sure, but nothing like today internally. You go back from 2017 until today, almost on an annual basis, we have seen demonstrations and protests.
Yeah.
After the Women Life Freedom, the killing of Mahsa Amini, after that, the whole social base of this regime was eroded because the strength of this regime politically lied in the countryside, where they were socially, religiously conservative. They've lost that. They had lost the urban areas already. Now they've lost. So let
me ask you one more, because we benefit from your wisdom, and I'm running out of time. What portion of that shift that you're describing, and that is a weak Iran that might be pliant for external goals, unless you push it so hard that you cut the head off the snake and you have three snakes and it's the worst outcome, which is also possible. But what portion of that is for those internal reasons you're mentioning, including of course, the protests we've all seen, and what portion is what Israel has done post-October 7th, which is fight a different kind of regional war, dealing with Iran's proxies, and of course the unrest in Syria? What part of it is the chessboard finally changing?
It's a combination of both. The question is exactly right. It's a combination of both. Because what feeds the disaffection on the inside, even within parts of the regime, is a sense that you had a strategy that completely failed. You invested huge amounts in a regional proxy network that completely was washed away. The Israelis basically dramatically weakened that proxy network to the point where have they been when Iran was being attacked? Nowhere. So huge investments.
Which is funny, and then I'm going to really give you the last word. Nothing's funny about it. It's all very serious with lives lost. But the old fear, which was sometimes expressed by American doves, was be careful. You rattle Iran, and they unleash these other folks that are all over, and like it or not, you have to deal with it. And it seems that is less true today, those terrorist groups.
Look, one of the realities is those, quote, American doves had the sense that you could never use military force for any favorable positive effect. And you basically had to find ways to accommodate the Iranians and their regional proxy network. That proved to be wrong. it proved that, in fact, these were highly defeatable, not particularly effective, in the end, lacking any real legitimacy where they were. And Iran, the sort of mothership of all this, also was much weaker than was understood. This notion that you could never attack Iran directly because the sky would fall. Well, one of the things we found was that when they lost their sense of impunity, we saw how weak they fundamentally
Yeah, it's really
were.
interesting. I'm over on time, but some people say you are one of those American doves, even if you might be more hard-headed about the details. I don't know if that's a fair assessment or not.
Well, look, do I believe that you use diplomacy? Yes. Do I believe you can use diplomacy to achieve objectives? Absolutely. But I always believe that diplomacy works best when you have real leverage. And real leverage sometimes comes with coercive backing. The idea that you can negotiate without leverage is an illusion.